All right, so RA12 is what we're working on today. Like I said in our tutorial that we did on Thursday, this is going to be quite a bit easier. All we have to do is create this keyword list, and it's going to be based on within this document here. All of these yellow or marked items, they're actually inside of a DFN element. So we'll need to grab all the DFN elements basically and sort them alphabetically, and then attach them to an ordered or list or an unordered list, and then display it in this little side box here on the right. So it's actually quite a bit easier because we don't have to do all the indenting. We don't have to deal with the heading levels like we did in the tutorial. So let's go ahead and get our Visual Studio open, and then open up your 125A from the root. Okay, so we're in the HTML12 folder here, or actually no, we're working on review assignment, sorry. So we're down here now to the RA12 folder, and we'll be modifying then this HTML file, bc_fed and bckeys.js. So we'll need to open up both those files, put our name and date in there, and then save them without the _txt. Just copy that so I can use it again, and then we'll do the file save as here. And just get rid of the _txt. So we end up with bc_keys.js for the JavaScript file. And then in the HTML file, put in the author and date info there, and again, do the save as. Get rid of the _txt.html. Okay, so now that we have those two files, here in the instructions says that we want to go ahead in the HTML now and insert in the head section the link then to our JavaScript file, and we want to load it asynchronously. So here we are in the head section of the HTML document, and we just want to grab that bckeys.js and drop it in there, and then just add the async attribute. Okay, so there's what we added into the head section of the HTML document. Just a script tag, has the source pointing to the JavaScript file and the async attribute. So then we go into the JavaScript file. This is where we're going to pretty much spend all of our time. Before we do that, though, let's just quickly look at the HTML document here. So you can see this is the article ID'd as doc. So this is the one that we'll be pulling all of the DFNs from. So just as you go through this paragraph text, you can see you've got various elements marked as DFNs. Some of them already have an ID in there, so we'll need to allow for that in our program. So if they don't have an ID in there, like this one here, which is empty, what we need to do is add an ID that will identify it by the text value that's inside of the DFN. Or actually, I take that back. They do a numerical sequence here. They put in the word keyword as the ID, and then whatever the number is in the loop as we're going through the collection of DFNs. That's how they actually ID them. But if it already has an ID, it'll just leave the existing ID. And the reason for that is, just going back then to the graphic here in the tutorial, these are all going to be hyperlinked here. And so what we'll be able to do is once we get the keyword list built, we'll be able to click on these items, and it will actually take us then to the location of the DFN within the page. So you can see it's just a bunch of paragraphs, a lot of DFNs. So we'll be making a collection, right, of all of those. And that's where the article ends, and then we got the footer here. So we're going to have to add, because I don't believe they have it here. Yeah, we're going to need to add the aside element then into this document. Okay, so now they want us to go back into the JavaScript file, add event listeners that's going to run this function here, find keywords, and also make styles when the page is loaded. So we just have to add 2 event listeners that we're targeting the load event, and then list those 2 functions separately. So we want to go underneath of all of the commented stuff that we have here in the JavaScript file. So we'll be working right in this area here before the supplied function, which is this replace white space function. What it does is just basically goes through and looks for any spaces and removes the space. So like public good that we were looking at a moment ago was public space good. So to make that a clickable value, we would make it public good. So they remove the space from it and then return the value with the space removed from it. So that's something we'll use in our program just to perform that function, get rid of the white space in any of the actual text values within the DFNs. So we're working up above, about line 30 or so, below all the commented text from up above there. And we want to add 2 window event listeners. So it'll be window.add event listener. In both cases, we're going to target the load event, so that needs to be in quotes, and then comma to separate the parameters. And so then we'll have find words, that's the function that'll run on load, and then also the make key styles. Now we'll actually create that keywords function, and its whole goal is to locate then the keywords from the document. So that's all the DFNs, and then generate the keyword list. Within that function, we'll add to it using steps 5 through 10 here. So we create the function first, and then 5 through 10 will give us the additional components that we're going to be adding into that function. So just right underneath of our add event listeners, we'll go ahead and use the keyword function. Type in the name of the function, which is find, and it's camel case, so capital K, capital W keywords, parentheses, and then curly braces for the statement blocks. Remember, the way that we've got it typed in and spelled here has to match the way we referenced it up here in the add event listener. So we'll save that, Control S. Back to the instructions now at step 5. We're now going to create an aside element. The ID attribute will need to be added, and it'll read keywords. And then also they want us to add an H1 element with the text inside of the H1 element that reads keyword list. So the first thing is creating the aside element, and we'll write a little comment for that as well. So inside of our function, find keywords, we'll add this comment that reads create the aside element for the keyword list, and then we'll generate a new variable using the var keyword. We'll type in camel case keyword box, and that'll be equal to the document.create element and then an aside. So at that point, we're going to have an aside element in memory, and that'll be the aside that we add to with each of the individual keywords that'll make up the list. And then once we get this all done, then we'll need to attach the aside, append the aside to the actual and an existing element there in the actual HTML document. So all this does is just begin the process, right? We're establishing a variable. It's called keyword box, and that's just all it has in there is just an aside element. So then we'll continue to add to that here in just a bit. In fact, the next step here is that we want to add the H1 element with the text keyword list. That's right. We actually have another instruction here first, don't we? Let me go back. Create the aside element with the ID of keywords. So we hadn't really done that step yet. Right, we created the aside element, which is assigned to keyword box. So now we need to use keyword box. and use keyword box to actually set up then the title that we want to put in there. Does anybody remember what the method is that we use? Go ahead.
And it's set attribute.
Very good. Excellent, Crystal. That's correct. So we're just taking that keyword box, using its set attribute method, and then we'll go ahead and just paste in there the values, which is, we got ID, which attribute it is that we want to add in there. So it's going to be ID, and then what's the value that we want to assign to that attribute, and that's going to be keywords. So again, just using the variable, the aside element that we created here in the previous line. So now we're calling that aside element and using its set attribute method to put in the ID equal to keywords in that aside element. So the next thing then is to create an H1 element that we will then append into this aside. So that was the second part there of step 5. We want to have it contain an H1 element, and in that H1 element have this keyword list as the text. So we got to start just like we did with the aside, create the actual element in memory first. So we'll use the var keyword title as our identifier, and that'll be equal to a document dot create element, and then the element name, which is the H1 element. The next thing then is assign to the inner HTML property of that variable keyword title. That's how we'll get the actual text in there that's going to display in the H1. So that's just, again, using the variable we just created, keyword title, matching it in case and spelling, and then applying to the dot inner HTML property the actual text that we want to show up inside of that H1, which is in quotes there, capital K, keyword, space, capital L, list. Then the last step would be to just take that new variable, the H1 element, and attach it now into the aside. So on the next statement here, we'll use our keyword box and then its append child method, and then we're appending to it there the H1 element, which we've identified or stored in that variable keyword title. Alrighty then, let's move on from step 5 now to step 6. So step 6 now is asking us to create the ordered list element and append to it the keywords aside element, or I should say append it to, right? Because the keyword aside, that's going to contain everything. So once we create the ordered element, we want to append it to the aside element. And we're going to have a comment here for that as well. In fact, I'll just grab both steps here, the creation of it and the appending of it. Okay, so there's our comment, place the keywords in an ordered list. And then we've got the var keyword list equals document dot create element, and there's OL to create the actual element, which is an ordered list element. And then we want to add that now back into the keyword, or append it to the keyword box. So you can see again, we're passing in, using that append child, we're passing in the OL element, we're appending it to the keyword box, which is that aside that we built first. Remember, this is all sitting in memory. We haven't appended this into the document yet at all. In step 7, you can see that's a multi-part step now. So it says next we want to generate the list of keywords and also add IDs to each keyword entry in the source article. Remember, we showed you the DFN, some had IDs, some did not. And so what we're going to do is create an object collection. It'll be called keyword LMs, short for elements, and that'll be created by selecting all of the DFN elements within that document. So you can see there, they give you the hint, we're going to be using the query selector all method to do that with. Then after that, we'll create an array that's named keywords, and it'll have a length equal to the length of the keyword elements collection, because they're basically going to make a copy of the values from one collection to another at this point. So then what we do is we create a for loop so that we can go through there and grab each element and then make the modifications that we see in A, B, and C. So just going down below where we were, we'll add another comment, and then we'll create our keyword elements collection. So the comment reads, locate all the keywords in the source document. Then we generate a new variable, which is going to be camel cased as keyword LMs, again, short for elements. And then using a document query selector all, you can see that we're going into that article that's ID'd as doc and grabbing all of the DFNs that are inside of there. So keyword LMs is going to be an array now of all of each, each element will be a value, a DFN value from the document. Then the next thing they want us to do is to create a new array. So we did this one here. So then we're going to create this array here, which is going to be named keywords, and that will have the same length. It'll be empty initially, but it'll have the same length as this keyword elements that we just created. So that, remember, is already a collection. So now we're just creating a new array that'll have the same length so that we can basically copy the values from here and place them into here. Kind of a temporary holder. So that's just a definition of a new variable, essentially. Right, we use the var keyword. We're going to call it keywords. Notice the capital W there. And that's just simply going to be an instance of an array object. And it's going to have as many slots in it, as many elements in it, as does the array up above it there, the keyword LMs array. So we're just taking its length value to, as we declare keywords, we're creating an array of the same size, same number of elements. Okay, so we did all of the first part of 7 here. So now what we're going to do is add a for loop that'll go through each item in the keyword LMs object and then do these 3 steps. So the first one is set the value of each item in the keywords array to the text of the corresponding item in the keyword elements. So just again, copying from that original array and placing it into the new array. So what I'll do here is let's first put in the for and then put in its closing curly. So that creates the for block for us. You can see that we just established a new variable here, I. We're going to run as long as it's less than the length of the keyword LMs and just increment I each time through. So a pretty basic for loop. And now within that for loop, what we want to do is, again, copy into the keywords array the value from, which we're going to use the text content property, from the keyword LMs. So here's the keywords array at the first element, and the first time through the loop, right? We're at the 0 element, and we're assigning to it the key word LMs at the first element, and whatever the value is, it's stored in its text content property. So that's what's getting stored now in the new keywords array. Just made a copy of the value, essentially. Step B, then, we want to set the ID of the current item in the keywords array. It does say that the ID cannot contain blank spaces, so that's where we're going to use that function that they already provided for us. So we'll need to call that function and pass the value in there, have it remove the spaces, and then return it back to us without a space. Basically, you can see it just puts in an underscore character if there's a space in there. So we'll call that function, and we'll have it apply then as the current keyword as the parameter value. That's what we're passing into it. And then again, it's going to return to us the results of removing the space, putting the underscore in there, and it'll be stored in the link ID variable. Okay, so just underneath the previous statement there's the var created link ID, and there you can see we're making that call to the replace whitespace, replace WS function that's already created down below here. And all it does is go in, remove the space, and replace it with an underscore. So that value of that current keyword with the underscore being assigned to the variable link ID. And so then finally, we want to set the ID of the current item in the keyword object collection to the actual value. So you can see we're going to append now before that link ID, the actual word keyword underscore, and then the link ID. That's the value we just stored in that new variable, remember. Okay, so there's keyword elms. We're setting the attribute of the ID to the value of keyword underscore is a string, and then concatenating that with whatever the value of the link ID is, which is going to be the actual DFN without any spacing in it, essentially. With the spaces removed, if there were spaces, and replaced with an underscore. Okay, so that finishes 7A through C. And that completes the for loop then at that point. So again, all we've done is just taken that original array of all the DFNs, created a new array with a copy of each of those, but we've modified the values now so that they have the ID of string keyword underscore plus whatever the actual value of the DFN is after running it through replace WS. So the next step then will be to just sort that keywords array. So we'll go outside of the for loop here now. We're going to add a comment for it as well. And that reads sort the keywords in alphabetical order. So all we had to do is just simply call that keywords array and run its sort method. So that just takes every element in that array, sorts it alphabetically. So in step 9 now, we're going to generate the list items in the keyword list. So we're going to use another for loop, go through each item in the keywords array, and do all the steps that we see here in 9. So let's start with the for loop. Okay, so there's the opening curly, and then we'll give it the closing curly. And so everything else goes in between. So still using the keywords array, and in this case then, again, like any for loop, when you're processing a collection, you're just going to run it as long as you don't exceed the length of the array. So the first step then in the for loop, it would be to declare the keyword list item variable and have it store an actual list item element. Because that's how we create list items, right? Inside of the OL is we have to have LI tags that will then contain the actual keyword values. So that's a pretty simple statement, just generating that new variable. So var camel cased keyword list item. So notice word, list, and item, all camel cased or all capitalized. And that'll be equal to using the document objects create element and just creating a new element, in this case, a list item element. So that's how we get started. Then in our next step here, says we need to declare the keyword link variable. So that'll be the variable name, and what it's going to store is an anchor element. So just like we did up here, we created an LI element, just same thing here. It's just that this is going to be the variable name, and that's the element that we want to have created. So there we go, var keyword link, again, camel case, so capital W, capital L, and that's equal to a document dot create element, and we're creating an anchor element, so in quotes, an A. Okay, so we have these two elements sitting in memory now, the link element and the anchor element. In step C, we want to change the inner HTML of the keyword link to the actual value of whatever the current keyword is in our array. So we're going to change the keyword link inner HTML, and the value that we're assigning to it then is the keyword at the current position in that array. So remember, that's the copy, right, of all the DFNs, and removing the spaces and adding that keyword value before it. So that's what we're targeting now every time that we go through the loop here. And all we're simply doing is assigning it now into the actual anchor tag that we've created here. It becomes the value the user sees. In step D now, we'll create the link ID variable, and that's containing the value returned by the replace WS function using the keyword as the parameter value. So right here, just creating that new variable they asked us to create, link ID. Notice that both I and D are capitalized in that case. And then we're running it through keywords. We're running it through replace white space. We're passing it the value, the current value of the element that's in the keywords array. In step 9E now, we want to change the href value of the keyword link to be hashtag keyword and then underscore link ID. So if you think about it, if our DFN elements in the document have all been assigned this pattern, starting with the keyword, that's the string keyword underscore, and then whatever the link ID that was appended to it, if we put a hashtag in front of it, that's how we use anchors to target an ID that's stored in the existing page. So, this is a hyperlink value really that we're putting in there, the href value, which if you think about how an href works, usually you've got like a URL, the user clicks on it, takes them to another page. But when we assign the value using the hashtag as the beginning, that means just look in the current page, look for this ID value in the current page, and that's where we want to have you navigate to. So we need to use the set attribute then of the keyword link and assign it the attribute that we need to add into that anchor, which is an href attribute. And then here you can see we're concatenating a hashtag, a number symbol, plus the string keyword underscore, and then the link ID. And honestly, I don't know why they didn't do it like that, because it would basically work the same. I think they just wanted you to kind of see it separated out. So we're adding an href attribute into our anchor, and then we're prepending all of the link ID values with that hashtag keyword underscore, so that it'll match what's in the document, right? There won't be the hashtag in the document, but all of the IDs of all the DFNs will begin with keyword underscore, and then whatever the link ID is for that particular DFN. Okay, and then we're down to F then, append the keyword link to the keyword list. So we're adding the anchor to the list item, and then we'll append the list item to the actual OL that we originally started out in the earlier step, step 6. Okay, so keyword list item. So that's the first element that we created up here. Now we're using its append child method to actually make the connection, still in memory, but make the connection of the anchor to that LI. So the current LI now gets the current anchor attached to it. And the next step is to attach then that current LI back into the ordered list. So to do that, we'll use the keyword list variable, which is the OL on line 42 here. So there's where we created that keyword list variable. That is the OL element, still in memory, but now we're appending to it the keyword list item. So if you think about what's going on here, we've got a list item, we're appending to it the anchor, and then that combination of the list with the anchor inside of it now gets appended to the OL each time we go through the for list, the for loop. All right, so that's going to be it for that for loop. In step 10 now, we're going to insert the keyword list box that we defined in step 5 as the first child of the article element ID'd as doc. So if you remember back to looking into the HTML document, we had this article element and it is ID'd as doc. So we need to target that, and then as the first child, we want to append into it our aside element that we just built here with all the rest of that code. So it's basically a two-step process here. First, we have to target, we have to get that element before we can actually append to it, or insert, I should say. We're going to use the insert before. So we create a variable called history doc, and that's going to be the actual article element that's inside of the document already in the HTML with the ID of doc in there. So now we have that var. So now we can use history doc and use the insert before method to append everything we built up here. So we take that variable, history doc, use the insert before method, and now you can see we're passing to it the keyword box, and we want to place it in the history doc, which is the article element ID'd as doc, and we want to make it its first child. Actually, want to insert before the first child. So if you go back to the HTML, here it is. What we're really saying is we want to append it right before that element right there. So we grab this element, and this is its first child, and we're saying insert before the first child. So that means it'll append everything right into there. Then the last thing that we do here is to create these custom styles. And so they've got a function here, make key styles. And so I'm not going to go through and type all these out because you have all of them there for you. I'll just go ahead and paste it into the document so that you can see that it just all goes inside of a function that's going to be called make key styles. So in the JavaScript file, BC keys underneath, outside of our previous function. We'll add this new function here. It's called make key styles, and you can see that all they're doing here is just making custom styles, inserting a rule. There's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. And all of that information is right there in the textbook. So, there's no real need for me to go any great length there. You're familiar with what CSS rules look like. You just need to get them appended into the document. In fact, you can see how they're doing it right here. They're creating this var key styles. That's going to be a style element. And then the next line is in the head section of our document, we want to append the key styles. So that'll be the last thing in the head section, since there's no value, first child or insert before, and nothing like that going on. We're just appending it to what's already there. So that means it'll be the last item in the head section. So then we just use the document.style sheets, and in this particular case, we're using -1 as the number of values in there because there is no rule to begin with. And then we just go through and insert a new rule, again, 5 of them. So that's just basically a copy and paste. So let's save this. Let's go out here to our BC Fed and run it in the browser. And see that we do indeed get the aside box. So the formatting of the border and all that was in the styles there. There's our keyword list, which is the H1 element. Now we got all the listing of all the DFNs in here. And if I click on one of these DFNs, it should take me to that location in the document.